After looking at strategic piece exchange decisions and pawn structure decisions, we will open a new topic now and start looking at something that is connected to both of these topics that we have seen before. And these are strategic decisions that include positional transformations. Positional transformation, shortly, is a situation when something fundamental in the position changes, and this change has a long-term effect on what is going to happen in the game. So naturally, these are not simple decisions to make, of course, and you need to use all of your knowledge and experience to figure out whether the transformation that you're thinking about is good for you or good for your opponent. And we will see a dozen such examples here, again from the games of club players. So mostly this will be instructive mistakes, and the first one that we will see here, or let's say the first sub topic that we will see with positional transformation, is a case when we have one positional concession versus another one. So we have to decide between which one of the two positional concessions is more important, and whether we should allow one thing or another. So here we have a position where white has a slightly worse position simply because of this weakness on e4. We have seen this game before in the chapter on pawn structure, when we said that pawns don't move backward, and you can see later in this game that indeed white had suffered because of this e4 weakness. And now black plays the move knight c4, wants to bring his knight closer to the center, and this is a really nice outpost for the knight. And the question is now, should we make the exchange on c4 or not? Now it looks very natural to just recapture on c4, get rid of that knight, and then try to do something on the king side. However, when we make this exchange, we have to consider what kind of positional concession we are making, because black can take in three ways, and one of them is very unpleasant in a strategic sense, and this is if he takes with the b pawn, because then b2 is a permanent weakness, a backward pawn that can hardly be moved forward, and it's just a liability throughout the game, whether it's the middle game or the end game. And I would be inclined not to make this exchange as white, because worrying about this b pawn is really a big problem for white. So I would try to keep away from this exchange. And actually there is a pretty good move for white here. It's the move knight b3 with a concrete plan in mind. The idea is to invade c5 square. So firstly we would make the exchange on f6, and then go to c5, which is an outpost that kind of counterbalances black's outpost on c4. If black goes knight e4, we can try to trade it off with the move knight g3. So yes, black is still slightly better, but playing like this, we are keeping this damage, so to speak, to a minimum. But by taking on c4, as happened in the game, black would have obtained a very serious positional advantage in the long run by just attacking this backward pawn. Instead, he took with the d pawn, and actually we have another position that we analyzed in this course when we talked about the piece exchanges. So if you remember, here white had the choice to exchange on f6 or not, which he didn't solve correctly, so he played knight g3 and then after knight d5, black got a fantastic outpost on that square. Instead, he should have taken on f6 and then transferred his knight to e4, and he would have a decent position then. So a lot of difficult strategic decisions in this example. Difficult if you don't have enough experience to assess these positional elements correctly. This is why positional transformations are often very tricky. Let's see another one where it is again wise to move, and he has a similar sort of issue here. There is pressure against the c3 pawn along the c file, and naturally he would like to relieve this pressure by exchanging on c4, also trading off his passive knight. And what is the concession that he's making with this exchange? Well, he's allowing black to open up the d file, and we have to assess whether it is worth allowing that, because if we're in time to play queen e2 and trade both rooks, then it's probably okay. We still have a weak pawn on c3, but it may not be that easy for black to get to this pawn after this exchange. So let's see. After queen e2, if rook d8, we'll go rook d1 and trade some rooks. But the problem with this plan is the following. If we play like this, black will fix, first of all, put the pawn on e4, fix the weakness on d3, and then he has this very nice exchange sacrifice, which at some point should be accepted. And the point is here that actually either way he takes, he gets a fantastic position with the defended passed pawn on the third rank. For instance, here he opens up the c file, and now this pawn c3 is probably doomed. And even if he takes with the e pawn, then knight e4 comes and queen e5, and once again I don't really see how white can survive this in the long run. He simply has too many positional problems, and his rooks are completely inactive. So this is what black could have done. Play d4. He didn't in the game, and then white was in time to play rook d1, trade rooks. But yeah, this is the kind of concession that you're giving if you take on c4. So instead of this, it was better to keep on maneuvering a bit. Black doesn't have any concrete threats yet, so it was logical to give some space to our pieces, maybe start with a move like a4, and then open up the a file, go rook a1, and maybe take on c4 at some later point, because this bishop on c4 is going nowhere. Yes, black is still better, but it is not nothing dramatic yet. Okay, so another case of a mistake when it came to a positional transformation. Let's come back here. Not assessing the power of the open file and the outpost, and also the exchange, the classical exchange sacrifice, rook exchange sacrifice, to create a pass pawn. Now let's see another example. Here it is black to move. So we have a structure from the Rosolimo variation of the Sicilian, and it looks fairly balanced. Black has the bishop pair, worse pawn structure, so white's hope is of course to eventually use these weaknesses on the queen side. But what should black do? So white wants to do something like a5 and maybe attack the pawn on b6. But what is black supposed to do? Try to think about this position for a moment and find the best plan for black. So it seems very natural to play bishop d4, and this was played in the game by a 1900 player. The reason that he played it is, of course, to, after the exchange, to undouble his pawns, and here he has a really nice long pawn chain. But now we have to ask ourselves also what is the concession that he made here. So yes, he improved his pawn structure, but on the other hand, he doesn't have the bishop pair anymore, and the position became more closed. And in this type of position, the knight is usually slightly better than the bishop. So here, first of all, it's also not irrelevant that white can play a5 and that way obtain initiative on the queen side. Maybe he can play or try to take control over the e-file with moves like rook a3 and rook a1. And then secondly, also, after a normal move like bishop e6, he has this idea to play b4. And after this, he puts pressure on all these pawns, b6, c5, and d4. Taking back, obviously, is not good for... Taking on b4 is not good for black, because d4 pawn falls. And then after rook b1, he indeed has pressure against black pawn chain. And the knight can prove to be a more useful piece than the bishop. So this positional transformation is not good for black. He had better choices here, and a much better choice actually is a move f5. And we can place, instead of f5, we can play something normal like, let's say, bishop e6, and then preparing c4 to open up the position for our bishops. And something like this is still better than what happened in the game, because the bishop pair is a significant factor here, especially if we can play f5 at some point. But we can play f5 at once. There is no reason why we wouldn't do this. And this type of position is very nice for black. I don't think he has to worry about anything. Even if white plays a5, he can prepare c4 at the right moment, and his bishop pair should guarantee him at least an equal game in an open type of position. So this positional transformation would be favorable for black. You just have to be aware of your potential strengths, and black's strength is his bishop pair. On the other hand, by playing bishop d4, the positional transformation is in white's favor, because he gets initiative on the queen side pretty much by force, and also in the long run, as we said, the knight can be a better minor piece than the bishop. So a very nice example. Let's see another one. Here we have the English opening, which black didn't play in a very principled way. He's given up the bishop pair for not too much, and I think white is just better. So the question is now, how should white continue? Once again, you can think about this for a moment, try to find the best plan for white. And here I would like to suggest that white should just naturally play bishop b2, and then try to push f4 to open up the diagonal for his bishop, to use his bishop pair. So in the game he played the move e4. The idea of this move is just to gain space in the center. But what I don't like about this move is that it weakens the d4 square, and actually this could have given black a chance for counterplay. We will see that shortly. But the move that I want to analyze quickly is bishop b2. So black didn't play the opening so well, and now he's just a little bit passive. So let's see, what if he plays something like this, transfers the knight to g6. Well, we can stop it with knight h4, and also preparing this thematic move f4, where we open up not only the f-file, but also, as I said, the darks for bishop. This is very important. And yeah, this gives white attacking chances by default. Now please notice how I haven't played e4, and so by not playing e4 I've kept my bishop on g2 open as well, and also in case of knight c6 I can always go e3 to prevent knight d4 or to expel the knight from d4 if it comes there. Whereas in the game, after the move e4, Black didn't play the right plan, but he could have. First removed his knight from there, and then pushed c5, and this way, even if White opens up, or tries to open up, as we analyzed before, with f4, Black will get excellent counterplay in the center with knight c6. Later he can go a4, b5, and this is something that White didn't have to allow in the first place. So there's no need to weaken d4 square like this. So yeah, this positional transformation is in Black's favor. So even though he still maybe hasn't equalized, he obtains counterplay, and we simply didn't have to allow that. This also, I think, ties in well with this chapter on the pawn structures, when we said pawns don't move backwards. I mean, when you make a move like e4, you have to always think twice about the weakness of the neighboring square. We talked about that. Okay, now we have another example of positional transformation involving pawns. So here, White to move. His position is slightly worse. Of course, Black has the bishop pair and better pawn structure, more space, controls more space. And here White decided to go rook d6 so that he could maybe create a pass pawn on the d file. Supported by rook d1 and bishop b6, indeed it looks very dangerous. And Black's problem here was that he didn't really even spend time thinking about the exchange on d6, because he just assumed that it's dangerous, especially since his high-rated opponent has played it. But if we dig a little bit deeper and we look at this more closely, so I think we talked about this issue in one of the examples on pawn structure decisions. When is this kind of pass pawn strong and when it's weak? Yes, in endgames in general it tends to be strong, but if we can block it and if we can attack it with several pieces, it can also be weak. So I'm imagining a scenario where I'm going rook d8, king to e6, and bishop to f8, and I'm winning this pawn. So let's try to do this. Rook d8 first of all stops it, and then we can bring our king to f7. Okay, maybe not to e6, but definitely we can play bishop f8, and suddenly it becomes clear that this is actually a weakness. So even if the knight moves, we have bishop b3 or king e6 later, and we are just winning this pawn, I think. So remember this: if your opponent has a pass pawn and it can be blocked and later attacked, then it's worth thinking about going for this positional transformation. But what Black did in the game was not only bad from a positional point of view, because he didn't make this exchange, but also from tactical. He played king f7, trying to bring his king closer, but there is a tactical shot that he completely missed, and this is bishop takes h6. And now, because of the position of this king on f7, there is a fork on e5, and he's just losing. So, or at least he's losing a pawn. Maybe he can still play for a draw, but that's a whole different story. Here he could have played for a win by blocking the pawn and later attacking it. Okay, and let's see one more example of positional transformation. Here it is Black to move. A very complex position from the Ruy Lopez. So Black, we can see that Black's pawn structure is not that good. I mean, he has weaknesses on both queen side and king side, but he has one thing going for him, and this is the attack on the d4 pawn. And this was, I think, a good enough reason for him to take on f3 now, because if queen takes f3, we win the d4 pawn. But he didn't do this, interestingly, because he thought, so he played the move knight a5, which was a mistake, but he thought that if he takes on f3, after g takes f3, white would actually get attacking chances on the king side. And maybe in theory this is true, but this attack is very slow. So white needs at least 4 or 5 moves to actually create some real threats there. And in the meantime, since the position is semi-closed, we can make sure to establish a blockade on f5, first of all, with moves like queen d7 and rook f8. And also we can transfer this useless knight on c6 to squares like e6 or f7. Yeah, e6 looks particularly good, because then we put pressure on f4 and d4 at the same time. And for example, now, okay, f4, f5 is obviously not effective, but even if white goes for h4, h5 attack, we can double up or even triple up on the f-file. As I said, bring our knight to e6, the other one to f5. d4 is also weak, so I think that black is actually better, not even worse. So this positional transformation, this pawn structure, was completely wrongly assessed by black. So I would firstly I would look at these pawns as weak for white rather than strong. Yes, there is dynamic potential in them, but I think that white doesn't have enough firepower to make this plan work. If his king was already on h1 and rook on g1, or if he already had h4 on the board, then maybe yes, maybe white can do something with these pawns, but in these circumstances and with weak d4 pawn, white is just too slow with this plan. Let's see what he did in the game. So he kept the status quo, and he played knight a5, trying to go knight c4, but that can be easily defended against. Now, after h3, once again, he probably should have taken on f3, but now it doesn't have the same effect, because d4 is defended and white can take back with the queen. So he retreated with the bishop. And now look at this. After the move b3, you can see that the last two moves for black were just completely useless. Both knight a5 and bishop d7 are not part of some bigger plan. And black probably underestimated also white's attacking chances here with moves like knight e5 and f4, or rook e1 and then bishop f4, bishop h6. And at the same time, black doesn't have sufficient counterplay in the center. So his moment to do something was here, when he could have and should have taken on f3. And this positional transformation, I think, would be in black's favor. Okay, so we looked at some instructive examples when we have to assess which positional concession is good and which one is not, and also transformations in the pawn structure. And we will continue looking at this interesting topic in the next video.